So now let's talk about ports and protocols. So when data is transmitted over a network, it's essentially done over what is called a port. You can think of ports as separate communication channels that hold specific purposes. So each port is going to do a different thing. And you're going to use a specific port based on what you're trying to do. So just for example, like if you're browsing the web, typically that traffic is sent over port 80 or port 443 because those are meant for web browsing. And in total, you don't need to know all of them. You only need to know a handful. But fun facts: if you want to impress anybody, tell them, "Hey, did you know that there are 65,535 possible ports?" As an ethical hacker, there's some ports that you need to know, or at least be aware of, because these are going to be ports that you might find during an assessment and be able to take advantage of, or just it's going to help you understand, what a specific server or computer is doing. All right. So I'm going to go over some of the top ports and protocols that you need to know. So these are typically going to be called like common ports because they're frequently used and they have specific reasons why they're used, and it's going to be very helpful, like I said, for you to understand. So you should probably attempt over time to commit these ports and protocols to memory, or at least just have it written down somewhere so you can reference it very quickly. It's going to help you in the real world. Don't worry. There's plenty of people at desks. Don't feel bad about this because there's plenty of people that at their desk they have, different kinds of like cheat sheets posted on the wall just so that they know. Because not everybody wants to take time to memorize it, but it will help you to memorize it if you can. So first up is going to be port 20 and 21, which is the file transfer protocol. We're going to keep all these at a very high level just so that you understand, because it's all you really need to know. So file transfer protocol, or FTP, is simply what it says. It's for transferring files. So this is very important to understand, what that port is if you see it open, because it might be something that you can exploit or use when you're doing a penetration test. So port 22 is called secure shell. Now this is a protocol that superseded the next one, which is port 23, Telnet. So both of these are pretty much methods of remote login. So the problem with Telnet was that it was unencrypted. So if someone were to listen in on traffic over port 23, everything was in plain text. So you can get usernames, passwords, all kinds of sensitive information. So port 22 secure shell was created to be used, as an encrypted form of remote access to systems. So if anything is intercepted over port 22, then it can't be read in plain text. It's not something that can be decrypted very easily either. So it's very important to know you should choose port 22 over port 23. If you have port 23 open on your computer, close it. All right, simple. Next is port 25. This is the Simple Mail Transport Protocol, also known as SMTP, and this is the port that mail is typically sent over. Next, we have port 53, which is Domain Name Service, or DNS, and this pretty much allows us to map IP addresses to host names. So, like for example, Google.com has a specific IP address, but we might not know that IP address by heart, so we type in Google.com. And then DNS is used to figure out the exact IP address for us and takes us to that site. So this is pretty much like a high level how DNS typically works. Then we have port 80, which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol, aka HTTP. That's just web traffic. Then we have port 110, which is going to be the Post Office Protocol 3, or POP3, as you might have seen it before, as a lot of people call it. This is simply just a port that's used to receive email. So I like to think of it the way I remember it, since it's POP3, I'm like pop. Email came in or something like that. Like an email just pops in or something. That's how I remember it. You don't have to remember it that way, but that's a good way to remember it. The next one is port 123, and that's the Network Time Protocol, aka NTP. And this is just the port that's used to synchronize time and synchronize clocks across devices on a network. So a lot of devices, they connect out to another device and synchronize their time with that device via this port and this protocol. So port 139 is server message block, and pretty much you just want to know this is SMB, and this is kind of like file transfer, pretty much typically for Windows, but it's also for other systems as well. but you're gonna see it a lot on Windows. It's pretty much when you're allowed to map to different drives. Like if you're able to map to another computer on your network and actually go browse the directories from your computer, you're using SMB to do that. Port 161 is the Simple Network Management Protocol, aka SNMP. And this is pretty much how network devices kind of communicate back and forth, kind of like status messages and such. You don't really need to know, you're not going to be tinkering too much with that, but that could be very helpful, as you'll see later on, for penetration tests for gathering information, okay? Port 389 is Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, or LDAP. And this is pretty much the port that is used with Active Directory for Windows. So it could be useful on a penetration test. It's good to know, what that port does, because it's something that we could, use in the future and take advantage of, because we definitely could potentially use Lightweight Directory Access Protocol to our advantage. Next is port 443, and this is just Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. So this is typically what we're using when we're on the web. We're using a encrypted session so people can't steal our information. Like if we log into our bank accounts online, we're probably doing that over port 443, and this is securing our communications. And port 445 is another port for server message block. It's just kind of like in a different format. We'll understand that a little bit later. Just know that that's 445 and 139. Both are server message block. And then we have port 3389, which is remote desktop protocol. And this is how we remotely log into our computers. You can set up port 3389 on your computer and be able to remote into it from another computer on the network over this port. So it's just used for kind of remote management. And if it's left open, the system could be vulnerable to a potential attack. You just have to gather the right information to be able to attack it. So now let's go into a little bit about, TCP and UDP. So when using ports, it's important to know that each port exists on both TCP and UDP. So like there's a TCP, 80 and there's a UDP 80, there's TCP and UDP for both. So TCP is what is known as a connection-oriented protocol, and that's built around, confirming packet delivery. So when packets are sent, every delivery is confirmed, and if it's resent if delivery is ever, seen to fail. And so that makes it a little bit slower than UDP, but it's more reliable. Now, UDP is known as a connectionless protocol, meaning that, it doesn't check for failed transmission of packets. As a result, it's faster, but you might lose some information or packets along the way. So for the purpose of this course, just know that both exist, because some specific protocols or some specific ports might be available only on UDP versus TCP. You don't need to know, down in the trenches exactly what each one is. Just understand at a high level that they both exist and that you need to be aware of both of them, okay?